Russian bear will liberate Europe from contact report 863.
It is clear and evident from the prophecy that it has been fulfilled.
That is indeed the case when I recall it from my memory. But you can put this in writing for your perusal and add it to our conversation when you recall this and write it down, please.
Of course, just a moment, please. I want to retrieve it, but I have to have the book first. Here, I have it there. Just a moment. Effectively, I cannot find it in there. Nothing, but I think I will ask Bernadette. She is always great in such things. I can rely on her. So I will insert this prophecy here in our conversation when she gives it to me on a stick.
If you think so, then add it.
America and Europe will tremble when freedom comes from the East with a hard hand, which is oppressed from America and Europe, but which will be punished by a hard teaching for the sense of world domination which they wickedly cherish, and thus put countries and peoples into dictatorships. The great bear will come, who will bring freedom, Russian land, which will put down all the unfreedom that rings out of many mouths in America and Europe, as it does in many other countries around the world, but the bear from the East will destroy it and settle the whole thing into peace and freedom. But it will take a long time until then, with lamentations that are carried out into the world with tears, because evil terrorism, dictatorship, hatred, and war deny peace and freedom victory. Might and greed for world domination are tearing the world apart, and in many countries there are even death cries because America and Europe are carrying out unfreedom and beating the human beings with war, need, and misery. The peacemakers whose actions are based on might are taught by the bear and told that claims to world power stir up evil strife, which leads humanity to death and ruin. Therefore, the bear will tear apart all the evil of America, and it will also promise the same to Europe. When wars violently destroy everything in the world, crisscrossing from the world striking America, when the same echoes from the European dictatorship and cries of murder resound from evil terrorism, then the bear will start to bite at the strife, and this will tear apart the evil doings of the Western powers.
The 7th of July, 1949.
The prophecy. Wait, this should actually be said once for the sake of understanding. A prophecy is generally, but from time immemorial, misunderstood by human beings. This is because a prophecy is actually a threat and not a prediction, but also a reminder that people should not continue to muddle along in the same bad manner as they have done up to now, because otherwise a negative result will result. It is to be said that a prophecy is something that predicts what can happen, especially when everything is done and acted in the same manner as it is done at present, and also in the future, so that the result is what the prophecy warns. If, however, the whole course of action changes for the better, and everything is henceforth done in accordance with correctness, then a prophecy referring to it will not be fulfilled. For then what was prophesied will not be fulfilled, and everything will change into something better. Then everything will be good. Now, as far as a prediction is concerned, it is based on an effective certainty of a thing or an event, etc., that is unchangeable and will be true, and come true or happen with 100% certainty if everything has been done, that is to say, done correctly. On the other hand, a prediction inevitably comes true and cannot be influenced, changed or stopped with the best words, efforts, actions, and thus with the greatest efforts or with the highest attainable willpower of thought or otherwise. A prediction is based on something that will come to pass and thus happen under all circumstances, and this also when everything possible speaks against its fulfillment. This should be said and explained once, so that human beings may correctly understand the difference between prophecy and prediction. What is to be said in clarification with regard to prophecy concerning Russia applies to all prophecies about Russia that I have written, for all of them have become null and void, and that because everything has changed for the best through correct words, and correct action. This is precisely because everything has turned out in such a manner that what the prophecies warned about has turned out to be good through a total improvement and transformation. And for the fact that everything changed and resulted for the best and good, a responsible man appeared in the USSR in 1985, who consciously and courageously stood up for the fact that security, and in many cases, freedom and peace were spreading in the West. This happened especially in Germany, but also in East Germany. The GDR dictatorship, which collapsed, made everything possible, which were able to reunite. The big thank you for this today is criminally provided by those depraved neo-Nazis in the German government who supply weapons, etc. to Zelensky, and thereby perpetuate the war and murder in Ukraine, costing many thousands of human lives. But all these ethically and morally severely depraved neo-Nazi elements in the government of Germany do not care, because they do not, yet have to take the rap for their own heads, which particularly concerns certain megalomaniac, inexperienced and partisan, as well as lousy neo-Nazi elements in the top incompetent German leadership and foreign ministry. However, the fact that America is behind the war in Ukraine in the first place, but covertly and secretly, and that it is arranging everything, is deliberately kept strictly quiet. Namely, it did not fit into America's craving for hegemony that it could not bring its NATO to Ukraine because Russia was against it and vehemently defended itself. Already in the past, contrary to the promise that NATO would not expand against Russia's borders, this promise was broken and finally everything was thrown overboard. Consequently, country after country was taken over and NATO spread and settled in, of course secretly arranged by America. So, America's NATO desire eventually led to war in Ukraine, which, caught up in hegemony mania, wanted to put its NATO on Russia's doorstep, but Russia resisted until Russia's leadership ran out of patience, and Putin, with their consent, unleashed the war in Ukraine. Of course, this was and is a crime, as every war was and is today, as it will also be tomorrow and into the distant future. But if Russia had not started this war in Ukraine, America would have done so in a much worse way. Just think of the crimes of the American military and of Hiroshima and Nagasaki in the last World War from 1939 to 1945. Truly, the Nazis did catastrophically bad, inhuman and criminal things. But what America has done in bringing the atomic age into being and developing and using the atomic bomb is far more evil and worse, which will be carried further into the future. It is now to be said that if many countries had not been incited by America against Russia, especially Germany and the EU dictatorship, to supply weapons etc. to the warmonger Zelensky, then nuclear munitions etc. would have been used immediately by America, which would have caused a worse catastrophe and had worldwide consequences than these which already are. And that is absolutely certain, and actually the world can thank you that it was not America that started the criminal war, but Russia. If America had launched the war, together with its NATO, which is actually directed by America in the background, then many things would simply have been Matai at the end, and several millions and even billions of human beings would no longer be alive. And this is also to be said, if it had not been for America, and if it had not incited other governments and peoples against Russia, and if mercenaries had not been called upon to intervene in Ukraine, which quickly happened, with even Swiss people going to Ukraine as mercenaries, because Zelensky quickly built on a mercenary force, then the war would have been dead and over in 16 days. But hegemonistic America was not interested in this, because the hegemony mania simply did not allow it. This, however, is not the fault of the righteous Americans, but only affects those human beings in America who go along with the hegemony and agree with what the government and shadow government are doing in this respect. But why the prophecies did not come true and everything turned out differently is, as I said, because everything changed for the better, and none of the prophecies made are valid anymore, because everything changed and turned for the good. With regard to the actual how and why, it is necessary to elaborate a little further and say the following, some of which I have taken from Wikipedia, but which I will formulate briefly. In 1985, President Mikhail Gorbachev came into the picture and was the General Secretary of the Central Committee of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union CPSU from March 1985 to August 1991. the Soviet Union, being a state in Eastern Europe and in Asia from 1922 to 1991. The abbreviation USSR, standing for Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, equals known as the Soviet Union. It was regarded as the terror of the whole world, so to speak. Gorbachev was a radical reformer and was concerned not to abolish socialism, but to revive it and transform it into an efficient system. He propagated glasnost openness and perestroika restructuring, and he was in favor of more freedoms and also more responsibility for each human being. Through his efforts, he forced the reforms of the economic crisis, as well as the mass flight of human beings to the West, but also the peaceful demonstrations of the citizens of the GDR brought about the end of the GDR dictatorship. In order to save the existence of the Soviet Union, President Mikhail Gorbachev reached for autocracy, for which purpose the People's Congress then authorized him to dissolve the parliaments of the constituent states and to govern himself. Relying on the army and secret police, the opponents of a possible reform of the USSR, which however did not come about due to Gorbachev and his very initiative, and that through his efforts the unification of Germany and its eastern part, the GDR, came about as East Germany, when the GDR dictatorship was ended and abolished. That part of the present government of Germany miserably returned the favor, the part of the neo-Nazis of the government, by supplying weapons etc. to Zelensky, which are used against Russia, which has been demonized since time immemorial and recently even more so by America. Effectively, Gorbachev, and thus Russia, changed everything for the better, so that the West and the world no longer felt threatened by the USSR and a freedom and peace emerged, which made the populations of Earth loosen up because the dangers emanating from the USSR were no more. There was now a certain freedom and a form of peace that had not been possible for a long time, because the enmity between America and Russia alone prevented it. But as America continued to live under hegemony mania, it sought to finally cut Russia off from the West with a nasty NATO intervention in Ukraine, which Russia's Security Council did not put up with and gave Putin free rein. But the idiotic rulers, mainly of America-friendly Western countries, who let themselves be blinded by America, fell for its trickery, lies, and deceit. And in doing so, they are causing such immeasurable damage, without thinking about reality and its truth. That is pre-programming the coming disaster, which can only be prevented if the effective truth is still recognized and acted upon. All the governments and populations of those countries that have been and continue to be taken in by America's machinations, that is to say its government and shadow government, are doing everything they can to give their underhanded efforts and wishes all the help they can, consequently aiding and abetting strife and secret service murders and wars. And this will continue until it is finally realized that America and its murderous organization NATO exist in a delusion of hegemony that will stop at nothing and cash in on the whole world if it is not powerfully countered and the world domination eras are not finally ended.
However, the leaders of many earthly states are too blinded to recognize the truth. Quetzal and I have clearly fathomed and recognized this in our exploration of the attitudes, abilities, and behavior of the leaders of all Earth's states. This is what we have been mainly concerned with over the last few days, and we have also realized that only very few of the leaders are capable of effective and just governance. The majority of these persons in all states are only educated to such an extent, if one can speak of education at all, that they are capable of exercising their power over the populations without guiding them righteously.
It is indeed logic, reason, and sanity that are staggeringly minimal that such incompetent persons are appointed to state leaderships.
The Earthlings are just believers of religions, sects, and world believers, and thus not reality thinkers and truth thinkers. Consequently, it is also not possible for them to recognize who, how, and what the human being is whom they elect and idolize, put their trust in him, as they do with their imaginary God who can do nothing and nothing at all, neither in good nor in evil. And it is similar with the majority of those in power, who make the people unfree and enslave them with ever new laws, regulations, ordinances, and the use of power, etc., instead of making them truly free and peaceful, namely by instructing them in this respect, so that they then really preserve freedom and peace.